Amazing
Have
stuff.
you ever thrown up during a leg workout?
Oh, no. No,
No, never.
absolutely not.
All
No.
right, so that kind of answers my next question, where I would say, do
Okay.
you think you know how to train legs hard if you've never experienced throwing up during a leg workout?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think there's a causal relation I think throwing up during a leg workout might even indicate like a weaker stomach, like maybe a sensitivity to stimulus. I don't know. I don't throw up when things are intense.
You're the first person I've
Do
had
people
say that.
really?
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah, no,
but
I think I have a good handle. Like I think I can stop myself from throwing up. I think I have a high tolerance for that. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. There's definitely a genetic factor to it as well. But I also think, well, you're also the first woman I've had on this podcast, so we'll put that into perspective. I think in general, I don't want to, say anything stereotypical, but I feel like men have the tendency to want to train like balls to the wall animals, screaming, push themselves to experience that. I don't really see many women train like that. I don't know. Do you train like that?
Uh, to the point where I need to throw up and I can't control that impulse. No.
Where you
No.
overload your entire nervous system to the point of it just puking its brains out?
No, I do that in other aspects outside of training.
Oh, do you? Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Um, all right. So that's where I'm trying to take like a survey here to get the medium here. You're the first no, which I kind of expected, but I just asked that to
Yeah.
everybody just to see what the general consensus is, because the idea behind that is, I think you can obviously agree that most people in the gym don't train hard as it is. They're nowhere near failure. So it's like, if somebody,
Yeah.
given the right circumstances, right, they didn't just eat a meal, they don't have a weak stomach, but if somebody has pushed themselves to that level of training, again, in the natural environment where they're just pushing their nervous system that far, it kind of creates like a threshold of knowing how far you can actually go. And it's like a reference point as to when you're doing sets and you're training later on as you become more experienced, like, how hard you can actually go compared to the effort that you're putting in. Does that make sense?
Oh, totally, totally. I'm all about pushing limits, but I think with training, training, I can't say that that's specifically what I'm striving for.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm actually like I'm pretty into free diving. It's a new hobby-ish. I dabble in it, um, and that's something like with like static holds, you're pushing past the convulsions. So I mean,
Mm-hmm.
like your body's like, hey, stop now, uh, and you don't. You try to push past that. So I can understand it in different regards, but with actually throwing up, yeah, can't say I've ever done that. Um, I do like the feeling of being buried in training. I think that experience for me, it manifests a little differently.
Mm-hmm. So
Yeah.
with your clients, do you have any specific ways that you go about teaching them how to train to actual true failure and pushing those mental limits?
Yeah, yeah. So big, and I mean, I'm sure with your clients, you see this too. It's like if you didn't play sports growing up, you probably don't have that baseline, that litmus for like what is max capacity. So
Mm-hmm.
some of the clients I work with, I mean, they don't know what that is. For them, I'm actually telling them, like, I want to see video proof of you failing. I want to see a halt, a complete stop in velocity on a rep. And this is not like on like a machine. Like typically, I guess it could be on a machine, it could be on leg extension. Sure, if we really want to go that way. For something like a squat, maybe it's not like, hey, I want to put you in a compromised position, but I want to see velocity almost completely stop, if not go back down. So I think some people they have this idea, okay, when they feel the pump, oh, that hurts. I don't like that. Okay, and set. That's what we're trying to overcome. For some people, it does take, a couple weeks. I'm like, hey, like let's see it though. Let's like show me you failing in video.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just consistent feedback. I do that as well. Just the videos, because you see all the time people will send you a set to failure, and it's like you had 15 more reps in you. I think people kind of they don't test the waters. They kind of stay what's comfortable, right? They could go a lot
Yeah,
heavier than they're able to. And then I think there's also the whole aspect of, I think it's where the thing, did you play sports growing up?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
What did you play?
I played soccer, soccer, volleyball, the track, cross country.
Okay, so
Like
I
track,
think
cross country, I
that's
ran.
that probably plays a factor in here as to have you ever thrown up during one of those practices when you started?
I'm sure thrown up again, probably not, but very, very close.
Okay.
Around that point where I'm like, I can't go any further.
Yeah. But you have built just through years cardiovascular endurance. So I think that could be another reason is a lot of people come into training without really much of an athletic background and they do a set of squats and they're absolutely fucking winded, right? So
Yeah.
it's, building cardiovascular endurance to actually be able to get past that point and actually reach muscular failure, not just failing because you're fucking winded or because of metabolic stress. Um, so yeah, I mean, it is obviously just a learning curve, but I was curious to hear your thoughts on that. But before we get any deeper into this, real quick, anybody who doesn't know who you are an IFBB pro, you're a coach, you're one of the few female PED educators out there. Tell us how you really got started, how long you've been competing, how you really got to where you are right now.
Yeah, yeah. And again, thank you for having me on. I'm excited we're able to do this. I'm excited to be the first female guest on here. Sick.
I know,
Appreciate
right?
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I did my first show. I started prepping for my first show in 2014. I was into bodybuilding, like into what bikini was at the time. Obviously, it's a much different division now. I at the time was already like managing my own nutrition, my training, and I mean, playing sports, I was like, yeah, like I enjoy the process of training, weightlifting, modifying my body composition through nutrition, cool. And I really wanted to see, okay, like what's the limit here? What can I do? So started getting ready for my first show. I think I was competed in teen there. So I mean,
Mm-hmm.
like I did well. It was like a two-show season, took a little time off, two more shows. Then, I really started to immerse myself in wanting to understand how things were done correctly. So I mean, I took it upon myself to really further my education. So I looked to people, Lane Norton. I mean, he was big at the time in educating people on how to really make these modifications without falling into the standardized approach of, broccoli, chicken, rice, tilapia, which, I really gravitated towards having an understanding of what we're doing, why we're doing, and can this be affirmed, with what the evidence says. I got back into competing in 2020 because, I mean, I had been off stage for a while. And it was this time I did my first national show. And I went in just kind of like, hey, I want to see where I stack up. I did well. I was like 1 point away from my pro cards. It's like, okay, cool. Like let's continue down this path. And two national shows later, I turned pro. I won the overall at Junior USA's, which I've talked about it a few times, like on podcast. I going into that show, I mean, like I was not confident in my ability because I was like, the competition has changed. It's evolved. It's got much harder. I mean, the muscularity requirements, the conditioning requirements. So really surprised, but also, like, okay, this is a fresh slate. So I did my pro debut like 4 weeks after that, and I actually placed second to Ashley K. And I was like, it's a 1 point difference. I was like, fuck, that's really good. That's again exceeding what I thought I was capable of. So I went on to do a few more pro shows, placed well, but there's obviously a very clear size discrepancy, which I was compensating a lot with conditioning, with posing, and it became apparent to me. I was like, man, like I want to do well as a pro, not just do well. I don't want to just get on stage and like, oh yeah, you got like a top five. Like I aspire to be competitive for to show up at shows and be like, oh shit, like she could beat me. I wanted that. I wanted to be able to go into shows and know like there's a good chance of winning. And even now, I still aspire to be on the Olympia stage. So at the time, I reached out to John Jewett and was like, hey, I know I'm doing things generally correctly. Objectively, their success I've seen, but I don't want to just get by on what I know I'm doing right. I want to fill in any holes I have. So started with addressing my hormones, with figuring out, okay, well, like I know there are things I can put in place. Frankly, I'm open to using PEDs. At the time I had already used different PEDs, but I really wanted to know what I was doing was one, the safest way possible, that it was indicated, that it actually made sense, because the things I had used previously and the approach I had taken, it didn't really make sense to me. I was kind of just following what I was being told to do. So started working with John, worked under him as female head coach of J3U for about a year, and really expanded my knowledge base on female PED use. And now we're here. Now that's apparently all I talk about on the internet.
What was the timeline for that? So you won your pro card in 2021, right?
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay. And is that when you started working with John as well?
Yeah, so I hired him. I booked him for a consult actually, just to go over like post show blood work after I completed my season. So I did 3 pro shows, hired him, and I was still working with the coach I was with for that previous season, turning pro, but it was very hands off. I mean, like Shane was very he would still honor that. He'd be like, yeah, you did a lot of it yourself. Like, I mean, you're pretty good on your own.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, the training. I was like, I know I'm not doing things totally correct here. I know there's got to be room for improvement.
Yeah.
Let's outsource this. So worked with John. He trained, like he coached me specific to training for about 6 months, and then um, I was getting ready to start. I mean, I was in nursing school, but I was getting ready to start the clinical aspects of it. So I was like, I kind of want to get back on stage as a pro, do one last season before I really get in the trenches of school. So 2022, I'm like, okay, do I want to keep working with Shane? Do I want to do this myself? And having been self-coached for a long time, a big part of my career, I was like, I kind of want to self-coach again. So I asked John, hey, what do you think of this? Like, you've been self-coached, you've now worked with me, you see how I work, you see my strength, my weaknesses. Do you think this is something I can do? He's like, yeah, absolutely. And here, if it helps, I can kind of be that second eye for you. More on like a one-off basis if you need it. We'll do check-ins like as needed. But the first 2 months of prep, I mean, like maybe checked in with him twice, and I'm like, hey, this is what I'm gonna do. This is what I'm thinking. Asking questions here and there, and then about midway through that season, 2022, he's like, I want to bring on a coach. Is this something you're interested in doing? I know you already coach. I would love to have you a part of J3U and to be able to help more women that come to me. So it's like, yeah, let's do it. So yeah, I think that I competed in 2 shows in 2022. Did well, not as well as I would have liked, but we also knew going into it, it was like I hadn't taken enough time in the off season to really grow, which understandably it's okay. But I was like, yeah, I still need more size, and even in just a year, I mean the level of competition at the pro league had evolved, and I mean, um, even now, every pro show, I'm like, Jesus Christ, I need like another pound, another pound.
For bikini.
Yeah, I'm pretty small comparatively, or at least I was. I'm less small than I was a couple years ago.
Wow. They don't have weight caps for bikini, right? There's no weight caps for any women
No,
divisions. No. No.
I don't think so. No. Yeah, not for bikini though.
Okay. You're just not a coach with J3U anymore, are you?
No. Yeah, it was just a year contract, and I mean, at that point, it really made sense for me to kind of go off on my own. So I've been, I was coaching prior to that, but it was more passive. I really started coaching full time when I was with John, and then, yeah, after that, I mean, I have done as much as I can while being in nursing school to scale what I'm doing. But I also, with coaching, it's never been something that I've wanted to do for volume.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like eventually the quality is just going to slip in some regard, and it's like I want to be able to give my clients a certain standard of service and really just where I'm at. I'm like, I can't do this at some of the numbers that other coaches are doing it at.
100%. I think a lot of guys definitely, you see it at the top because they get so much recognition. I'm not going to say anybody's names, but there's a couple people that I can think off the top of my head that, have significantly more clients than they should have, more than they can handle, because everybody wants to bite off more than they get you. And then this is the same people that you always get people leaving, going around saying, yeah, I didn't get responded to for 2 to 3 weeks, or sometimes even fucking months. They're just never around. There's no communication. It's just, how much money can I make? How many people can I sign? I think it's a big problem in this industry, and there's really no way to to like moderate or regulate it, because if somebody has the attention, they're going to take advantage of it usually.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think you really do have to kind of go off the honor system there. And it's unfortunate, but at the same time, I mean, I think it's important for clients to advocate for themselves and to know what they need going into that coach relationship. Like with Shane, I was very like Shane did a great job like teaching me how to get lean. Was it the best approach? No, but I mean that is what he does. Like I mean he's very good at getting girls lean. I think that going into that relationship, some people would, you know, bitch and moan about like the communication, be like, oh, that's not enough. But at the same time, it's like, for me, that was what I wanted. I wanted a
Mm-hmm.
very like cut and dry professional relationship. I didn't want someone that was going to coddle me, that was going to pander to me. I don't need the, you're killing it, girl. Like, so it depends really like what you're looking for. Other clients do want more support. And I think it's important when they go into these like consult calls, these interviews with coaches, you got to lay that out. Like, if you don't know what you need, how are you going to put that on the coach to anticipate that? I mean, you can try them out, but at the same time, like if you're not communicating, like, hey, can we make this modification? How are they going to know?
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. A lot of people come into coaching and don't really make it clear what their expectations are or even know what they want. And you see both sides where people are like you, where you get the plan, you execute it, we'll check in, and you don't really need to be coddled, or the communication really it's sufficient enough for you. And there's people who come in, they check in once or every week or once every other week, and like that's still not enough. They expect you to be texting them every day and like motivating them and congratulating them every time they eat a meal. They just always want to pat on the back, and it's like that's not going to happen. That's not realistic. I'm not going to do that, but maybe there's another coach that will. And that's something you need to clarify coming into any relationship with the coaches. What do you really expect? I don't think the majority of coaches out there aren't going to do that either. I think that's a kind of an unrealistic expectation for somebody to always want to pat on the back every time they do what they should be doing.
I couldn't agree more. I have a buddy who's a really, really good coach, James McIntosh. Yeah, he's amazing. He was telling me one of his clients, they wanted, right now they're at communication at three times a day. And I'm like, Jesus Christ. I'm like, absolutely not. Like, I'm sorry. Like, I get it. Like, towards the end of prep, yeah, there are clients that I talk to several points in the day, but I'm not building that into a contract. Like, you think that's going to be the standard? Like, I don't think that's a good fit. If that's actually what you need, there are some coaches that do that. They have open office hours. They're like, hey, here, you can text me at any point. If that's your selling point, shit. I mean, like, what? How poor are you at motivating? And I'm not saying James here. I think that's an
Mm-hmm.
isolated incident, but like I think there are coaches that like that's part of their marketing is they want that client to know anytime you can rely on me. It's like, yeah, but you're kind of setting them up to be very codependent.
Yeah. Yeah. I think people do that because of the fact that there are the extreme end of the spectrum where people aren't getting answered for weeks, right? They're just not getting responded to, and there's coaches ghosting people, or there's even people using ghost coaches, and you're not even being coached by the person you think that you're being coached by. I don't know if you're aware of that. I can immediately know. I immediately can think of somebody, but um,
I got two names that pop into my head and I'm like, yo,
uh,
like I know how much you're charging. Like, come on.
it's crazy, right? It's insane, and these people have
Yeah.
very, very good reputations as well, which is amazing. But fuck, what was I just saying? I just got sidetracked.
No, you're good. I was literally about to ask you, yo, can I curse? Because I am like, I've been cursing up a storm. I'm like, I don't know if we can do that on this
No, we
podcast.
could do that. You're completely fine. We can
Okay,
say
great.
whatever.
Thanks.
What was
Sweet.
I? Where was I just going with that? Oh, the
We were talking about,
communication.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. You use it as a selling point because you have that extreme end of the spectrum, and everybody kind of frowns upon that. So it's like, okay, I'll be here for you 24/7. And I tell people when they sign up, like, because I have all my communication through WhatsApp, like you could send me a message whenever, but don't expect me to respond to you right away. Like I have other shit going on. I always try to get back to you within a 24-hour time frame. Unless obviously if I have some shit going on, like I'll notify people beforehand. But um, you'll have people that even still they want a response right away. It's just a lot of people. I think a lot of people come into coaching simply because they're. It's gonna sound fucked up. I think a lot of people come into coaching because they're lonely and they want somebody to talk to.
I would agree. Yes. I think it's so important for coaches. I mean, I want your thoughts on this. for coaches to set boundaries for themselves to preserve their ability to coach at a high scale with high quality, but also setting that expectation, calibrating the client's expectation. It's something I ask on like the first interview. Like I make it impossible for clients to pay me before I've spoken with them on a Zoom call because I'm like, I don't want to get caught up in a relationship that I don't want your money if like I know off the bat in a 15-minute call. I don't want them to be like, here's my money. Okay, like here's the intake form. And then maybe like, this, I could have told you this was not going to be a good fit from the start. And that's one of the first things I ask them is like, previous coaching relationships, what were the main pressure points? Like what areas do you feel like you really needed that you didn't get? What worked well, what didn't work? And if that's something that they're very clear, like, hey, I need to be able to contact you daily, I'll tell them straight up, like, if that is priority, if that's number one, and if you're going to sacrifice the other strengths that I'm going to bring as a coach, I might not be a good coach for you. I probably am not going to be if that's the most important thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's extremely important to set boundaries. I mean, I tell everybody when they come on, like I have a whole intake form, like basically explaining like what to really expect. Like I just said, like don't expect me to be able to answer you immediately at any given point, because you always see that too. Like I don't know if you'll get a text from somebody and then you'll see it like later on in the day or the next day, and somebody's asking like what to do right now in the middle of their workout, as if I'm going to see that at that exact moment, and they're like panicking, like, hey, should I do another set? I fucking, did 15 reps on this. It's just some random question. Like I'm supposed to be on it 24/7. Like, oh, here you go. Like I'll answer any call you need at any time. And that's very unreasonable. And then I think also setting the boundaries as to knowing what you can handle. Right. So like I said, there's a lot of people who bite off more than they can chew. They just have the opportunity to make more money, and ego gets in the way, and they want to fucking just sign as many people as they can. But that always usually bites people in the ass because, as we know, word gets around very fast, especially in this industry. And if you're not answering people, if you're ghost coaching, people are going to find out. And sure, you might still get clients, but it's going to obviously severely impact your reputation and the amount of clients that you're able to get. And really, like the whole point is to be able to provide quality service to these people and actually help them, right? I mean, even if you have to increase your prices to maintain a lower amount of clients, if you have that much traffic, it makes more sense to do that. That way you're able to actually do the job that you're trying to fucking do with these people.
Absolutely. And I mean, frankly, when you look at your reputation as a coach, you're not going to be able to make everyone happy. I have people that, I mean, they said, I remember early on, I had a girl who I wasn't able to cure her Hashimoto's, and she wrote like a review about it on Reddit. And I'm like, yo,
Mm-hmm.
like, let's be clear, like, you're leaving some context out here. I mean, it was like very specific to, like, it was very specific to curing a diagnosis that I was like, I I don't know in what world do you think that a girl on Instagram is going to be able to cure something that like several providers have not been able to address. Also, like what's being reported is just it's a little spotty at best. So, um, yeah, no, in coaching you got to keep your reputation clean, but it starts with being very honest about how you're going about coaching and like the ghost coaching. God, that one gets to me. But
Mm-hmm.
also just not giving the clients really what they need. But again, setting that expectation from the beginning for what you can actually do for them and making sure that they understand that. I think actually getting the teach back is super important. So having them verbalize, okay, like they want to start a prep and they want to win their pro card. Okay, I can't guarantee that. I can't even guarantee that you're going to place well. But what I can guarantee as a coach, I can guarantee if you give me enough time and you follow what I say and you do what I say, you communicate what you need from me throughout the process, I can put you on stage in the to see out your fullest potential based on how you execute. That's the goal.
Yeah.
There's going to be variance along that person to person because someone's ceiling is going to look much differently depending on how they're going into that prep, what they're actually willing to do in that course of time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think a lot of people, this industry is just something else. A lot of people in this industry are very just money hungry. And there's a lot of people coaching who honestly shouldn't be coaching. I'm comfortable saying the majority of people that I see that are coaches in the industry really should not be coaches. And a lot of people will just tell their leads, their potential clients, like whatever they want to hear to get them to give them money. Like I'll have somebody fill out an intake form, or when they get on a call with you, say, hey, I want to be this weight shredded. I want to be this weight lean by summer. It's like, that's not even remotely realistic. So we need to manage your expectations there. Stop hyper focusing on the scale. Understand this is a longer process than that. Like, really, like, try to make things clear. And otherwise, again, their expectations are not going to be met, and it's going to look bad on you. They're going to be blaming you. You're not doing your job. They're going to be stressing you out. They're going to be bothering you. You're just creating this false expectation for them to follow. Right? And that's not realistic, right? This person has no chance of placing at a national show. This person is not going to go from obese to relatively lean in a 3-month period. These things, and you just tell them what they want to hear just for you to get money. It happens a lot. I don't know.
Yeah.
I can't stand it.
No, there has to be low latency whenever something occurs that is vastly different from what you need from them and in the actual action itself. Whenever someone does fuck up on their diet, whenever they do something that you're like, oh, this is going to directly, like, I know the easy thing to do. I've done this several times. That's why I can say, like, you got to address it as soon as it happens. It has to be a very short time period between them fucking off and you saying, like, okay, like, if it's isolated, if this only happened this time and they understand, like, oh, hey, this can't continue to happen, great, cool. Maybe you don't need to press them as hard, but the repetition of them continuing that same behavior, if you don't address it as a coach, I mean, you're kind of encouraging them to do it. I mean, you're not negatively reinforcing it. And you don't even have to be a dick, but you should address, like, hey, it's this kind of thing that ultimately is moving you further away from where we're trying to go. Like, it can't continue to happen. And if it's going to, we need to recalibrate those expectations.
Yes. Do you think a lot of coaches are afraid to actually be coaches, like take on authoritative positions and tell somebody that they're fucking up? Because I feel like a lot of people, again, just tell them what they want to hear. Some people fuck up over and over and say, oh, it was fine. Just get back on track this week. Like, there's never any actual, addressing the issue and saying, hey, like, you need to stop fucking missing 3 meals every single week for whatever reason. You need to stop skipping these cardio sessions. Like, this is why we're not going to get anywhere in the long term. If people just like let it rock and they'll just, overlook it. Okay. Just don't let it happen again. That's it.
I think hard conversations are that they're hard. And if someone is not willing to have those conversations in their personal life, it's probably going to manifest as well in coaching. Um, Being able to address someone and I would say call them out, but it doesn't have to be aggressive. Like, I'm an intense person. I'm not a very aggressive person though. And I think if you're going to bring something to the table, I mean, you should do it with compassion. You should do it in a way that actually does help the person understand, like, this is the outcome of their behavior and this is what that trajectory is going to look like. I think a lot of coaches are probably in that position where they're like, do I even want to bother? But in any kind of relationship, like, I mean, it's so much easier to sweep something under the rug. I mean, like, I can say that, like, those conversations, I mean, they don't come naturally to me. I don't think they come natural to anyone. I think you have to intentionally put yourself in that position where it's like, okay, do I want this behavior to continue? Because there's an effect as a coach. How many times do you want to open that client's check-in and already, you let out that heavy sigh? You're like, fuck, like, I know they weren't on track. We're 6 weeks out. Like, what are you
Mhm.
doing? Like, do you want that to be your life as the coach? Do you want to go into their show and be like, I just can't wait till this is over? Because I've had those clients where it's on me. I didn't address the problem. They're getting away with what I'm allowing. And that ultimately, I think that is the coach's responsibility to be like, hey, we can put a stop to this or not. Ultimately, it's up to you. You as the client, you're in the driver's seat. I can tell you what to do, but if you're not willing to make it happen, then this is where that's going to lead us.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely, you have to have those hard conversations. And a lot of people, like you said, they're basically reinforcing the bad habits. So a good example that I can think of is, when somebody would miss a cardio session, for example, and they'll just say, hey, can I make it up the next day? I personally will always just say no, because now I believe it reinforces the habit that they could just miss shit and it'll just be okay. They could just do it the next day now. So now, we're missing cardio sessions and now we're doing fucking 3 hours in one day of the week instead of just, following the protocol as it is. And that transfers over into, I can miss a meal. I could eat the meal the next day. It's like, it creates this whole effect where it changes their mentality as to what is acceptable. And that's going to obviously skew the progress that they see, the results that they're getting, what you're seeing in check-ins. And they might not even be telling you at a certain point because you might have reinforced it so many times that they think that's okay now. Like they could just fucking skip it and move it around, and that's fine with you.
You know, I'm fully agree. I actually moved away from telling someone like I need you to do X amount of cardio per day, X amount of times per week. Part of what I found to be really successful with coaching is assigning a weekly amount of cardio and telling them like, hey, like this is the expectation. Like you manage your time. If you are training legs, I don't want you doing 45 minutes of fucking stairs after your leg session. That is a poor management of time. That's a poor decision. But building in that autonomy that like, hey, I expect you to make decisions around where we're plugging this cardio in. I've actually found that I've run into less of that of like just poor planning on their part. And granted, I mean, like if we're talking about stairs versus treadmill, I'm like, hey, 5 minutes maybe pre-workout, max 20 minutes post-workout. I really want those longer bouts to be a separate session entirely, and we need to uphold that training performance. So doing 60 minutes of stairs or even treadmill before a session, that's poor planning on your part.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to be better for that. So I need you to hit these two requirements for the week. I need you to uphold your training and I need you to take care of your cardio. Now, if you plan poorly and you check in with me and you're like, hey, what are your thoughts? How can I structure this better? Cool, we can talk about that. But it also forces them to take ownership in that decision, which I feel like even with the diet too. I mean, like there are ways I've kind of factored that in that I ultimately lead them to be a little bit more independent, which I think in the long run is better for them.
Yeah, I could definitely see that, especially with cardio. Um, Now, do you keep that same type of approach in a prep setting, or are you more meticulous?
I'm I'm very meticulous, but I do keep that in the prep setting. I have them log exactly what they're doing. So whenever they check in, I can see like, okay, on your leg day, you did a second session, 2 hours. Yeah, you did AM cardio and then you trained 2 hours later. And I'm like, okay, that probably wasn't the best idea. So now it's an opportunity for me to address it, but actually letting them practice that. Okay, does this make sense? It gives me insight into their skill level, their understanding of what we're doing, why we're doing it, and the importance of timing cardio versus training. During prep itself, as things get closer to the end, or if recovery is an issue, that's a big one where I might be a little more hands on and be like, hey, like, I think there's a much better way to do this, or you might not see, but like how you're timing your cardio, it's not really conducive with upholding that training performance.
Yeah. So how do you feel? Because that you're saying that you give them kind of all this flexibility with cardio, especially in a prep setting. Do you advise fasted cardio at all? And what are your thoughts on that, especially given the use of uh, fat loss agents, clenbuterol, yohimbine, growth hormone? Uh, how do you go about that? Do you tell them to do fast cardio? Do you not even are you even on board with that?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like I would prefer them do fast cardio just because, I mean, ultimately it's going to push off their eating window. So maybe instead of eating at 6 a.m., maybe they're going to be eating at 8 or 9. It's going to give them a little bit of an ability to curb that hunger. In terms of the fat loss agents, like, yeah, it's going to make more sense. But I also want to respect that, like, a lot of these individuals, most of the individuals I work with, they're not full-time bodybuilders. A lot of them have jobs. So I'm like, hey, what's most important to me is that we're able to execute everything that we need with general ease. Like, I shouldn't have you going to the gym at 4:30 in the morning to do fasted cardio, and then working full day, then going home training. Like I need this to make sense for everything else in your life that you have in place. I think there's a little bit of a push and pull with balancing balancing work, families, personal responsibilities that they might have, but ultimately I need it to make sense for their schedule and just setting these blanket requirements when I personally I don't know what their schedule is. A lot of the time I'm like, hey, like you can write out what your day looks like, but we both know like that can change pretty frequently. And if
Yeah.
they have the means, I also work with a lot of female clients who tend to be really good at time management, very detail oriented. They can write out, be like, hey, like this structure, this scheduling allows me to get enough sleep. It allows me to stay on track and I have less slip ups. I have less missed sessions. And in that case, which I would say is like 95% of my clients, they don't have issues with managing that themselves. I find that to be pretty successful.
Okay. I want to talk about the woman's side of the industry, what your expertise is in, being the
Let's
first woman on the
go.
show.
Yeah.
So we know that obviously misinformation is very prevalent. It's everywhere in this industry. You go on TikTok, first thing you're going to see is probably some bullshit. But what I do really notice, and I don't get a ton of women content, I get a ton of, and again, there's misinformation everywhere. But when I see women's content come up on my feed, it almost seems like, again, I said, you're one of the very few educators, even in the PED space. As a woman, I don't really know many other. I could think of like maybe one, but it seems like there's so much more misinformation prevalent on the women's side of the industry. And I don't know if that's just the way that I'm seeing things. It just seems like all the stupid workouts get regurgitated, the booty workouts. It seems like they all just follow. And it seems like men are a lot more confrontational. And if somebody's saying something dumb, like, yes, misinformation gets regurgitated, but people call each other out. And it feels like women don't really call each other out or hold each other accountable for posting dumb shit, like the crazy workouts and all that stuff. And it kind of just, they're more loving and like supporting, and they kind of just bring that up. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know. I know exactly what you mean. Um, I am not loving or supportive of the bullshit that's online. I am just not confrontation. Like I don't come at people because I honestly I don't want that to be my brand. I don't think it has to be. I
Hmm.
think indirectly, I shit on a lot of it. I shit
Hmm.
on it all the time. It's just without like naming specific names or I I, I don't even want to like hate on people that like, hey, I'll take this person's workout and then I'll like review it. Whatever. I get what you're doing. It gets views. It builds traction. I get the social media game. I don't want to do that. I don't
Yeah.
like it. It's not my style. But um, I am very like the amount of friends, like colleagues, I guess we'll call them that, people in the industry that I'll converse with and they'll tell me really stupid shit. And they'll just be like, yeah, like they think I'm going to just side with them because I like them. I'm argumentative. Like I can't, it's a compulsion at this point. It's like, you tell me you're taking like 15 milligrams of Anavar, like, and you've been on it for 6 months. I'm like, what are we doing? Like, I'm like, oh, it usually then results in me like asking for clarity. Maybe there's something I don't understand. Maybe there's a reason. But I think approaching it in that sense is like, and it's a lot easier to do this if you're actually conversing with someone or you're having a dialogue. Seeing someone put something online, I do try to approach it. Maybe I don't understand the context, but there's a point where I'm just like, that's wrong. That's
Uh-huh.
just not right. Like I've heard people talk about PEDs that they talk about them in a way that it promotes, I would say, a it puts out a very dangerous message. Uh, but instead of like, messaging that person and being like, I demand for you to like explain yourself to me, like, no, who the fuck am I? I'm just a person on Instagram. Like, do whatever you want. But like, what that tells me is like, I need to put out more information. I need to do a better job at putting out information so it reaches more people. So the viewer can actually like take these side by side, these pieces of content and be like, okay, this one person is saying this, where's the evidence that like where's the claim being made from? Well, Corey's saying this. I mean, typically I try to put out only information. I try to do a good job of this. Only information that's supported, that is evidence based, and generally I believe is safe for most people consuming it.
Hmm. So, but why do you think? I think just on average that a lot more men are like just heavily involved into bodybuilding, right? There's a lot more. I think there's a lot more dudes who like look into the science of it, want to understand things than there are so women. I don't know how you feel about that, which I think is kind of why that contributes to a lot of this shit being promoted on the women's side, because there's not a lot of women that really can differentiate to what's bullshit and what's not, at least not as many. And if a girl looks good, they just want to look like that girl. And again, I feel like women are a lot more supportive of one another and like, oh my god, yes, like you look great. And men are kind of just like, this guy looks like shit. Don't fucking so don't tell me what to do.
Yeah, no, no, okay, no, I see where you're going with that. I can definitely get on board with. I think there's a lack of education on the women's side. I think there's a lack of understanding, not a desire to be educated. There's just, it's a lot. This is something I never understood at first. Hearing hearing information about PEDs, about training, about fat loss from a woman that looks good, that they want to look like, that hasn't viralized. I didn't really get that at first, that there aren't many in the space that talk about PEDs that have not viralized. That was something that, I now at this point I've heard from several people that I respect. I'm like, okay, it makes sense why a woman might be more keen on listening to me versus even listening to a male. Because like they want to know, like, hey, did does Sebastian, does he understand all the shit I'm thinking about relative to fertility down the road? Does he really have my best interest at heart? You might understand everything. You might understand things even better than I do. But I do think indirectly there's a trust and support that comes from hearing it from a woman. And I think oftentimes that can be misplaced. And then there's trust being put into women that might not necessarily have the pedigree, might not have the education or their own understanding of these compounds, of how to get where that individual would like to go. I think again, it goes back to the hard conversations. It's like people, they don't like being wrong. So, I mean, are you going to confront someone who seemingly it looks like they are better educated, looks like they're more successful than you, and they've got this following, they might look better. So, are you going to come at them and be like, well, why did you say this? Explain yourself. And then, I mean, honestly, I just don't think it's in most women's nature to do that, period. But the ones that do, they're often just met with bullshit. Like they're not really there's not a delineation between what is this person saying and is it factual. They're
Yeah.
just taking anecdote as fact.
Yeah. There's definitely, like you said, a lack of education on the women's side because there's not a lot of female educators. And I think a lot of women probably don't even see the male's side of fitness content, not at least not to the extent that we do. So obviously, like I said, there's misinformation on both sides. The majority of shit out there is probably misinformation, but on the men's side, you have a lot of misinformation, and then you also have a lot of people who are educated and know what they're talking about. And people, if you get both sides, you can kind of start to distinguish what's bullshit, what's not, as you learn more, become more experienced. And on the woman's side, it's like a lot of people who don't know shit and very few women who are educated like yourself. So if you don't hit somebody's algorithm and they're just exposed to, I don't know, fucking big booty Brie on Instagram that's doing 30 reps for glutes every other day, they're like, oh, this is the way. They've never been exposed to anything else.
That, and there are a lot of women of great influence within the sport that put out bad information. I
Mm,
don't think they do it intentionally. I think it's what they know. I just don't think that they know what they're doing is not technically correct. I mean, like you do for the training, like, I mean, you do enough of something at a high enough volume, yeah, you're going to see results. Is it the most effective way? Absolutely not. But that is something that a lot of the top athletes in our sport, they promote. Why? Because it's easy. It's
mm,
easy. It sells. Their asses look great. I understand it. I get it. It's what
mm,
I mean, it sounds shitty. It's the value they can provide.
mm.
I just think the standard needs to be higher than that.
It should be higher. You're right. So how do you go about creating a higher standard? Are you kind of pioneering the women's education side?
Oh, I hate how that sounds. Oh God. I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say that. I'm just fucking putting out. I'm just putting out Instagram. I'm just
Putting
putting
out
out
shit.
reels. I'm just trying to get the real bonus, honestly.
Trying to make some
Like,
TikToks.
that's it. That's it. No, I wouldn't say I'm pioneering it. I would say though, um, John, I respect him so much. And I mean, like, he really, for the longest time, he encouraged me to start putting out educational content. Even at the time before that, I was putting out educational content, just not to the degree I am now. And really, when it came down to PEDs, I saw that there was an issue. I saw that there were girls much younger than me who were getting into the sport, who had their heart in the right place, who were putting their trust into people that weren't protecting them the way they should have. And they were suffering the consequences. They were viralizing before they're fucking 24 and their voices sound different and they don't understand. And they're like, well, why don't I look like Laura Lee? Why don't I look
Hmm.
like Maureen Gendori? And why does my voice sound different? I thought this is what everyone did. Sorry, I fucked up. Well, hey, we don't have a lot of room to just fuck around and find out as women. And really, like, fuck, I told this story on the last podcast I did. When I went to Costa Rica, I went diving for the first time. And I saw a reef shark, and it was my first time in the open ocean. And I'm like, God damn it. Like, I saw the reef shark, and I'm like, I have to be the one to tell people about this. Like, I don't know the protocol. No one give me a handout on like, I don't know, seeing a shark. Like, and it like, I was so annoyed. I'm like, I don't know. I just, this is scary. It's not something I want to be in charge of, like telling like my boyfriend at the time, the locals. I'm like, like, what do I do? But I was like, okay, I guess I have to with PEDs, with educating. I'm like, all right, well, no one's doing this and it's going to keep happening. And there's going to be more women that are affected by this ultimately. Like it's just going to keep happening because there's no one in the space to at least operate kind of as a safety. And it's like, hey, take the PDs that you want to take. You're okay with the risk, you're okay with viralizing. It's not my place to tell you what to do, and I want to make that super clear. Like everyone's idea of viralization, like it can be vastly different, so like we should respect that, but we should also recognize that there are people getting into the sport that are now assuming that viralization is a part of the sport, that taking excessive amounts of anabolics to win your regional show is turning all the stones. That's fucking bullshit. Like that's just that you don't have to sacrifice femininity in order to find success in bikini. Like that's absurd. Yet that is slowly becoming the standard, particularly because we have a coaching climate that doesn't really inform or protect these athletes.
Okay. Yeah. So then let me ask you, what would you say are, I guess we could call them the most female friendly anabolics that, are pretty much good to go in a general sense. And then what would be the ones that are, absolutely no woman should take these unless they want to absolutely maximize virilization.
Um, if we're just talking about names in general, just like compounds,
Yeah.
it still needs to be a low dose. But like, I mean, you're going to look at your DHT derivatives if we're talking anabolics used in a cycle type setting. Personally, I think before that, we really have to make sure that test is at least within normal to normal high. If testosterone is low, you put in something like Anavar, Primo, Mastron, you put in something, it's going to have suppressive effects. Personally, I don't think it makes a lot of sense. If why are we putting the anabolic in place? We're putting it in to grow. That's why we should be putting it in. We're not using this shit as a fat burner. Anavar's not a fat burner. It shouldn't be in
Mm-hmm.
place at the end to burn the last to harden you up. Like that's
Okay.
bullshit. Like really, let's make sure that we understand mechanistically. Hey, you know what's fat burner? Clen. Let's put Clen in place to burn that last little bit of fat. Okay, or let's actually put you in a deficit. Let's like actually
Yeah.
create an environment where you can lose the fat. If we're putting Anavar in place, okay, it's to grow. Cool. Is your test really shitty to begin with? Is it always shitty? Because if that's the case, maybe we should do something about that. Because when you look at the dosing for these cycles, these Anavar cycle, okay, conservatively, 2.5 milligrams, it works. I've taken 2.5, it works plenty. When you look at the daily dose of 2.5 of Anavar versus 0.5 milligram a test, I mean, what are we talking about? That's so much greater. Yet we're not willing to put the TRT in place because it's testosterone,
Mm-hmm.
because it's an injection. It doesn't make a lot of sense. And I think that's where the decision making around using these drugs, it really does have to be based on where the athlete's at, where their labs are at, their goals, their risk tolerance, what they're willing to accept, and whether or not they actually have a competitive potential within the sport. For someone who is in the sport who maybe like, I mean, they don't even know if they can handle the prep itself. They don't know if they can handle getting conditioned, or fuck, can they handle the build? Can they handle off season, post show? Or are they going to rebound 30, 40 pounds after this because they really weren't prepared for what that looks like after competing? If that's the case, I mean, that's going into my considerations around should we be using an anabolic for a long duration? So, short answer, to maximize what we're doing while minimizing the risk of virilization, I would lean more towards supporting test first if that's indicated. If it's not indicated, okay, then we look at the appropriate timing of a cycle for a DHT derivative. So if we're talking about an off season, that's going to be Primo or Mastron, assuming accuracy isn't in question. Primo is highly faked. Sure, there are people, oh, I got the best source. Everyone thinks that their drug dealer is the best
Mm-hmm.
and that they would never do. Okay, like, yeah, we get it. Just assume they're not. Why don't we just assume that it probably needs to be tested? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
If we're talking about in contest prep, Anavar is shorter acting. If we're using it to support training performance, we're using it for cosmetic benefit, let's just say that, sure, that makes sense. Again, we don't need these high doses. And if someone hasn't assessed their tolerance at a low dose, I don't understand why we're starting them at a higher dose. Now, off the table, Winstrol, EQ, um, like, I mean, what are the other ones I'm forgetting? It's real. MPP, sure, there's an argument for that. I mean, sure, it's not something I'm going to lean towards just because, I mean, like with the demographic that I work with, it's just not one that I have found that I need to rely on. Sure, for performance athletes, if that's something that we need to support performance and that's our priority, could make sense. But I would also consider whether the individual is then going to be at risk for any kind of androgenic effects, just given that MPP is going to raise free test.
Hmm. And then as far as Anavar goes, do you typically deploy that only in contest prep, or do you make use of it in an off-season setting as well, where somebody's trying to maximize growth?
Typically just in prep. I mean, like I can understand if that's what the person has access to. Just the route of administration, it's an oral versus we're talking about Primo Mastron, it's an injectable. I'd rather not hit the liver. If we're already committing to taking a drug, to taking anabolics, I get the injections can be a hard line for some people. Okay. It's not something that I run into a lot of the time where someone's like, hey, I want to use PEDs. I'm not willing to inject. I recognize that is the case. In that case, maybe we consider Anavar. I've had clients travel where, or I guess where they're at, maybe they don't have access to it, or the accuracy of the compound is in question. So in that case, yeah, we could consider Anavar in the off season.
Okay. And since you're running Anavar at such low doses as a female, what does your timeline usually look like for how long you'll have Anavar in place? Because with men, it's typically like 4 to 6 weeks max, right? We're taking much higher dosages, obviously going to be much more harsh on the liver. To what extent, what's the difference there with women? Obviously, it's going to take a lot less toll since you're taking significantly less.
It will take less toll, but I also am like looking at this person's total lifetime exposure. So it's like, okay, 2.5 milligrams if they can source it, great. If not, 5 milligrams, really past like 6 to 8 weeks. And I'm like, why do we need this in place? What's the indication? I've had people run it for longer and it made sense given where they were in their competitive career. You have someone who maybe it does make sense. We're pushing into that 10-week mark. They understand, hey, we're kind of grazing past where we want to be, but we agree that this is an accepted risk. We agree that this is indicated. The tolerance for women to experience androgenic effects is much lower than men. And really, we don't know what that is for that individual. I
Mm-hmm.
just want them to go in assuming, hey, anytime you take anything, it's not going to be risk free. There's always the chance. So let's have prophylactically, let's have those bumpers, safeties in place to make sure that we're monitoring for side effects. Because if you want to do this cycle, okay, great. Is this going to be your last cycle ever? Are you going to likely just do one cycle and you're never going to touch it again? For most people, that's not going to be the case. Like
Mm-hmm.
realistically, it's just not. So if this individual, let's say they have high aspirations, they want to be a pro and then they want to make it to the Olympic stage. In that case, I'm thinking I'm having foresight enough to know that, well, this individual might want to do future cycles. It might actually be indicated for this individual to do future cycles. Let's not blow through that total duration of use, that total exposure, just because we can.
Okay. So that brings up another interesting question is, do you think a lot of both coaches and athletes focus more on the short-term results, short-term gains rather than the long-term, right? We could blast gear through the roof for these next 16, 20 weeks. I'll have a crazy transformation to post. I'll have this good testimonial. Fucking this guy's going to look great. He's going to win his show or he's going to have the best offseason ever. But then obviously, potentially shorten the lifespan of the person. But not only that, it's like you're going to shorten their career in the sport, their longevity. Do you think that's a big issue that's around in this industry? Is a lot of people focusing just on the short term?
Totally, totally. transformations are hard. Transformations are hard with drugs sometimes, and I think people kind of take advantage of that as they know, like, hey, we can make this really juicy. And I mean, you have to consider, okay, whose whose self-interest are they looking out for? Are they looking at the clients or their own? I think a lot of the time they are looking at their own because I mean, even the lifespan of a client working with a coach, it's great if you can get someone on for a couple of years, but that's not going to be majority of your clients, even for good coaches. I mean, like people evolve. Eventually, they are probably not going to need you, or they're going to go a different way. With bodybuilding, for the most part, people who are entering bodybuilding, even the ones who are very competitive, they're wanting to get a pro card and they're wanting to be done with the sport, whether that's turning into trying to run their own business, or they're just like, hey, I did the thing, I reached my peak. So, at this point, I don't really have aspirations past that. In that case, I can see why it happens. I don't think it's right. I think a lot of the focus needs to be on, like, at least for me, I try to think about like, okay, I'm I'm enabling this behavior. Like I'm a part of the decision making for this person. They value my opinion and they trust my opinion. So am I okay with potentially them waking up, in 5, 10 years, whether there was a decision that was made that actually impacted, let's say, a diagnosis or an outcome down the line? Am I okay with them maybe waking up and being like, yeah, I really wish Cory hadn't hadn't had an opinion here, hadn't given me the input because I kind of regret doing XYZ for this long. Ultimately, it's not our responsibility to make those decisions, but I do think we have to take ownership of the role that we play in that client's decision-making process.
Absolutely. Yeah. Again, it comes down to understanding what they really want, their risk profile, what they're willing to do, where they see themselves in the foreseeable future. And even then, they might not even really know, right? So it's always the best interest to play things safe rather than, put people in a harmful position. Another interesting thing about this is, do you think that you become, I don't want to say less receptive, but something changes over time? Because I know anecdotally what I've seen in a lot of cases is from the men's side is there's a lot of guys who will look insane when they're like 19, 20 years old. They look like they're going to be the next thing in bodybuilding. There's been quite a few of them. And when you started competing, like back around that time, there was, one guy I can think of, but these guys, they look crazy and they look like they're going to be the next thing. And then all of a sudden it's like they get older and it just stops. It seems like they stop responding. They don't get any better. They start encountering all these problems. And I think it has to do with the fact that some correlation with the fact that they ran a shit ton of drugs and got massive in a short time frame at a very young age. I don't know. What do you think about that?
I think we're terrible historians, and I
Yeah.
think people decide that, okay, here, let's establish this causal relationship between, introducing drugs for the first time. And sure, there is a ceiling that we all have in which we can grow, in which we can get conditioned. But at the same time, I think it's really easy to make that statement and attribute it to drugs without really doing an honest audit of the efforts that were being put in at the time, and really, I guess, taking an inventory of what they're doing currently. I think people get lazy with it, and maybe they forget why something, or even just don't understand why something was working previously. I think it's really easy to romanticize the cycle and be like, oh, this did it for me. It's like the drugs are the easy part, and they're only going to facilitate something that already was going to happen. Like, I mean, you're not going to find growth throwing in anabolics if you're in a state where you're not able to grow. And I'm speaking more to bikini and like female side of this, is like, we're not talking about an excessive amount. If you're not in a position to grow, you won't grow. If you're not in a position to lose fat, you won't lose fat. I mean, the amount of people that have come to me that have been like, oh, I put Clen in place, it didn't really do anything for me, I didn't lose any more body fat. I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
you're in off season, you weren't tracking shit. Like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, of course. Like, I mean, you're just very inconsistent as an athlete.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes sense. I just don't know if there's obviously, like, we don't know. We have to have all the information as to what they're doing, but it just seems like there's like this consistent thing that happens with these guys. There's obviously people that are not the case, but I don't know if it's the amount of stress they put on their bodies, maybe at a young age, just from like eating so much, maybe gut issues. It could really be anything, but it seems like there's quite a few people who make significant progress. And they're obviously, with I'm talking about like dudes who are like open bodybuilders. So we're kind of like getting away from the conversation here. But
Yeah.
doing that and putting on that amount of size at a young age and blasting gear, I feel like always ends up in negative repercussions earlier on compared to the guys that are like, in their late 20s and 30s doing it. And then the guys that are like 18, 19 doing it.
Yeah, and in that sense, like I do think they've kind of relied on the drugs as a crutch, not necessarily to augment what they're already doing. And I think you see those guys later in their career who are making strides, and it's like, yeah, they probably were being a little more conservative.
Mhm. Yeah. What would you, so do you mainly deal with bikini competitors?
Largely. I do coach some men, not a lot of competitors, but a lot of the males that come to me are CEOs, executives. They're like, hey, I want to get in better shape. I want to use drugs, whether that be recreationally or just some TRT. I just want to know what I'm doing is generally safer than what someone else would tell me to do.
That's great. Now, do you get any like wellness or figure competitors or things of that nature?
Some, it's pretty rare. Some wellness girls will come to me. I've worked with a few. It's not something that I'm against. It's just a matter of like coming to me and knowing like, hey, this is the approach I generally support taking. And if you want to be hyper aggressive and you want to accept a higher risk, there's still a framework that I want to follow. And it's not to say in those other divisions there aren't athletes who respect that. I just don't find that a lot of the athletes in those divisions come to me. Maybe there's a disconnect with like branding, or simply they're just like, hey, you're a bikini competitor. Why would I listen to you? Like, I'm much bigger than you. I've gotten much leaner. And it's like, yeah, that's totally fair.
Okay. So, in your experience from what you've seen and even the way that you deploy protocols, what would you say really is what are the different recommendations regarding anabolics when it comes to the different divisions in women? Like, what are the different, how much higher do the doses get? Do they stay relatively the same? If we're talking about figure competitors, are figure competitors like using Tren and MPP? Obviously, bikini competitors. And so, what are really the differences between those divisions from what you've seen and what you do?
There's certainly a discrepancy in dosing and in frequency, but that also comes with risk acceptance. I mean,
Yeah.
I find that I find that the muscularity requirements, even for like wellness, you're going to you're going to have to accept a higher risk. And with that, there's some women who are very willing to do so. Even in bikini, though, there's some athletes that are like, oh, yeah, I'm okay with a little bit of a voice change as long as, I get my pro card, as long as I, get the bombshell sponsorship. Cool. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, yeah, well, with those other divisions, like the minimum buy-in is going to be, I don't want to say virilization, but you're definitely running up to that line because of the baseline, even the individuals who are on the smaller side. I mean, they do have a high degree of muscularity. I don't see a lot of athletes who are being conservative or being as conservative as they should be in the other divisions performing as well. Now, it's not to say that the people at the top are using compounds excessively, but I would also say the degree of muscularity they have is probably supported by a lot of time being consistent, doing things correctly. And perhaps that is augmented by taking less than, let's say, someone who isn't performing as well. In terms of actual dosing, though, I mean, like I've heard crazy cycles for bikini, I've heard crazy cycles for wellness. I can't say that like there's a rationale for necessarily those other divisions using, let's say like Winstrol, Tren. I don't really understand that because I mean those compounds. I mean we're still seeing like from an anabolism standpoint, they're all accruing tissue at the same rate. Yeah, we can be partial to one over the other. We can be like, oh, like I like Mastron, I like Primo, cool. The amount of people that say like, oh, Primo it virilized me, it caused me to change really quickly. You sure it was Primo? You sure it wasn't Test? Because like this is the one that I can tell you, like I'm very keen on testing for accuracy. So typically for athletes in bikini who are using Primo, even if we're starting at a very low dose, you got to think like 15 milligrams a week, 1.5. If that's what we're putting in place, if that's testosterone, let's just use that, it's fake. Okay, cool. if I know their test levels before going into that cycle, and we know that like, okay, someone who's already on TRT, they're supported, they're at 70 nanograms per deciliter. We put Primo in place. 2 weeks later, they come back. If we have 15 milligrams of not Primo and it's actually testosterone, where do you think their test levels are going to be? Like, we shouldn't see a vast discrepancy in that value, but that happens. That can happen. It hasn't happened with any of my athletes, which I'm grateful for. But I think it's a little misleading to say, okay, like this compound specifically that isn't known for being highly androgenic compared to other compounds, it's going to cause this effect. The it's going to cause viralization at an accelerated rate. It could, maybe they're misdosing, but really the compound itself, it falls into that category of safer than other drugs. It's not to say it's risk-free though.
Yeah. What would you said you've seen some crazy cycles. What would you say the craziest cycle you've seen for bikini competitors? I'm curious.
I have a girl, who I'm working with right now. Her last coach, this is what he wrote out for her. She didn't do it, but not a national competitor. SARMs indefinitely. Uh, Anavar at 20 milligrams, Primo at 80 milligrams a week, 20 milligrams a day of Anavar. Um,
That's a
to
lot for
me,
a girl.
that's fucking, yeah, that's
That's a lot
so
for a
much.
girl, but hearing that
Like,
as a man, it's like it's nothing. But for a
I
girl, I
know.
guess it's a
Yeah, yeah.
lot. Yeah. Yeah. No, you hear
Well,
dudes like Trend, Matt fucking Deca, Anavar,
yeah.
Primo, 1,000 tests, growth, everything on the table.
I mean, the I don't even call them cycles because they're not, but the TRT protocols that are, 20, 30 milligrams a week,
Oof,
that's actually what I see a lot more from clinics and providers, just
that's
just
crazy.
wellness clinic. Yeah, yeah. I mean, you got girls sitting in 400 to 500 nanograms per deciliter range, wondering why they're bloated and feel like shit. It's like it's right here. Like it's very clear what is causing that. Um, but I can say like other wellness competitors have seen some pretty wild cycles. I mean, like that do involve trend, and just I don't know, just this selection of compounds. It's like, yo, like, why do we have 3 different anabolics in place? Like,
Hmm.
what's the purpose of this? Give me a reason, please. Like, there isn't really a rationale. It's disappointing. I would say what's more concerning in bikini is like I see these long duration of cycles at, even 10 milligrams, 15 milligrams, or I see the escalation of cycles. Like, okay, you had them on 5 milligrams of Anavar for a couple months and they did a show and they didn't win. So then we got another show in 8 weeks. Okay, so we bump them up to 10. Well, they were so close. So now we're going to bump them up to 15, or we're going to bump them up a little bit more. I'm like, they've been on Anavar for 8 months out of the year. Like, why? They're, how shitty is everything else in their program? Like, how shitty is the protocol itself that you need this and you need Anavar titrated up over, 3 quarters?
Yeah. They're trying to compensate for whatever they're lacking.
Absolutely. I think compensation is one of the main issues, one of the biggest reasons drugs are used in the bikini division, at least.
In every realm of fitness, it's probably the biggest reason why it's used. The majority of people who use drugs, we know, don't even look like they use drugs. Their diet sucks, their training sucks. It's just everybody knows the guy that says, "Oh, if I was on gear, I'd look like that too." And the guy doesn't understand anything about actually training or eating right. And a lot of people just fall into that assumption, and a lot of people fuck themselves up that way too.
Absolutely. No. I think Gen Pop would be very surprised how many people are using drugs that don't look like they're using drugs.
Mm-hmm. It also gives the expectation of everybody's a fake natural, because the natural people that look good and have their training and diet locked in, it's impossible to look like that. Yeah, nobody has good genetics, because everybody see the guys, they see the guys on gear that look like shit, and they're like, wow, this guy looks like this. There's no way that guy can be natural.
No, no. I think that understanding around like what drugs can actually do is very poor. So I mean, I am glad that more people are being open and talking about it, but I think on the female side, we've still got a long way to go before it's really recognized that like these drugs, there's a time and place and there's an indication, let's just call it that. But for most people, if you don't have your shit together, it's not going to do what you're thinking, what you're imagining it's going to do.
No. There's also, I mean, I don't know if you've seen the one study that people always like to reference of the fucking guys they gave 600 milligrams testosterone for what was it, like 9 weeks or something. And the stud, they didn't train at all and they gained, some amount of lean tissue, free fat mass or
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah,
Do you know what I'm talking about? They always reference that you could
yeah.
just use gear. You could use gear and not build muscle because of this one study and like not take any of the context into consideration. It's
Cherry,
amazing.
cherry picking. Yep. We love
Yeah.
the evidence-based warriors.
So let me ask you, how do you feel about the use of birth control, different types of birth control, women who are living this lifestyle or into fitness or are competitors? Is there anything that they should be looking out for with the use of birth control? And are there ones that you prefer or recommend to use over others? Why would that be?
Yeah. So when we consider what birth control is actually in place for, uh, it's to prevent pregnancy. So we're talking about something that intentionally is supposed to cease that production, that endogenous production of estradiol and progesterone. Now, when we are talking about the physique athlete, we got to look at like what do these hormones actually do for us? I mean, estradiol, it's beneficial for both fat loss and hypertrophy. When we're talking about someone who likely is already in a state where they're suppressed and you're causing further suppression, I I'm not a fan of that. Like, I mean, it puts you at a disadvantage. Now we're talking about the sport of bodybuilding. It's like, okay, what is the impact of birth control on this athlete's outcomes, on their efforts in a fat loss phase? Yeah, it's going to make it harder. It's going to put you in a position where you're not going to have as easy as a time losing body fat or building. It's actually needed for the conversion of GH to IGF-1, estradiol. So it's like when you looking at what's your goal with birth control, a non-hormonal form is preferable. So we're talking about like an IUD, like a copper IUD. Yes, there's belief that like the Mirena, it's progesterone only. And it's going to have a localized effect, but any kind of exogenous hormone that's put in place is going to cause suppression. That's where we have to consider, okay, is it just suppression of those direct hormones that are in that form of birth control? No, there's also a significant decrease of DHEA, testosterone. It's going to cause an increase of SHBG. It's going to lower free test. It's going to decrease insulin sensitivity. So across the board, if our priority is like getting on stage, it's not to say that there is an argument for a certain individual to use birth control. I'm just going to say blanketly, though, for most, it's not the best idea. And what I really want to explore with the athlete who's like already on birth control or considering birth control is what is our goal? If the goal is to prevent pregnancy, is there a non hormonal alternative? Yeah, there is. And copper IUDs are generally regarded as safe. Yes, there are some contraindications. There are individuals who I would say like it's something you should discuss with your provider. But generally, if the priority is physique outcome, that's the one I would go with.
Okay. Now, if they are using hormonal uh, birth control, obviously, like you said, it is not going to be ideal just in relation to bodybuilding, but are there specific things that you would want to clarify or people should know if they're using that, how they interact with using anabolics as a female?
Well, yeah, so if we're talking about something like Anavar, okay, any kind of anabolic, it's going to cause that suppression of test. I mean, like, you're really looking at now you're doubling up on a suppression of androgens in the body. So is it going to facilitate a better outcome when you're looking at hypertrophy? No. So now you have this anabolic in place that is still going to expose you to that same risk of virilization, and you're at a further disadvantage now from a building potential building capacity.
So it's just doubling up. It's even making it even worse now.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, I understand. I understand if you've had it in place. I understand if your doctor is telling you like this is the best route for having a regular period. It's not. And being at low levels of these hormones, it's not good for you long term. I mean, like we talk about the risk of bodybuilding as a whole, relative to fertility. Like, what about the risk of infertility relative to birth control? A lot of the time, you have people who've been on birth control since they were a teen to what have more regular periods or to completely cease having a period. You're anovulatory. You're in a position where you're not having that natural rise and fall of those hormones. So it's like I think before we start pointing fingers at like this sport where, yeah, it's an extreme sport and being in an anovulatory state is not good for fertility long term, it's not good for a lot of systems. I mean, like really digging into it, it just needs, there needs to be an indication. And I don't think there is. I think providers are very quick to prescribe birth control to correct a problem when mechanistically it's actually going to exacerbate that problem.
Okay, so with that being said, would you say, because funny enough, I've had a few women say this to me the other day. It didn't say it to me, I just saw comments on my post that, being lean as a woman is inherently unhealthy, which it's unhealthy for anybody, right? But you think if a woman's saying that and is using hormonal birth control, that it's ironic.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's also what are the markers we're using to define health? See, that's
Hmm.
like my argument would be like what is healthy? Because like I would define that like the epitome of female health is ovulation. So we're talking about like being lean. There are plenty of women who can get very lean and still ovulate. That's going to come down to individual resilience. Like, what is your body's perception of being in this state of perceived stress? I mean, but that's the thing, it's perceived. It's your total allostatic load. There are people that are not very lean who are non-ovulatory, who do not have a period, or maybe they have a period, but they don't have that release of those hormones every month. In that case, I mean, being lean has nothing to do with it. It has everything to do with their body's ability to adapt and manage stress in that state.
Yeah. So some people are just will be completely fine as competitors as women. I think that also is a big stigma is that everybody thinks that if women do a prep that their hormonal profile will just always inevitably be fucked.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, there's going to be some down regulation for sure, and we can generally expect that. And it's good to know what does healthy look like, what's normal for that woman. So, I mean, like in the off season, particularly, that's when I want to say, like, we should be ovulating in the off season. We should be in a state where we're not seeing chronic suppression. And if we're not, that's going to leave clues. It's going to give us signs to how this individual is going to perform and potentially the challenges they're going to face once they're in that state of low energy availability.
Okay. Now, you've been a pro. It's 2024. It's been 3 years now. You said you experimented with some PEDs before that, right?
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay. So, what are some of the mistakes, if any, mistakes you made when you were first introduced to PEDs that you would go back and change now, or just some things that you might have done that you want to maybe like clarify, don't do this or whatever.
Yeah, yeah. So, let's see. Big one was we
Trend.
used Nova. We used Trend. That was the first exposure. Yeah, clip that. Yeah, make that go viral. Um, Nolvadex. So we had that in place, which I mean is tamoxifen. So it's a SERM, selective estrogen receptor modulator. The idea was to allow me to get leaner, to put it in place to stop activity of estrogen at the receptor. I wasn't ovulating already. I
What?
wasn't. My estradiol was also low. So it's like that's a very, very common use of Nolvadex is have it in place, so estradiol doesn't get too high, so we don't get an excess of it. And it's like, well, this person is already in a state where it's probably not going to be high to begin with. The understanding, I believe, for a lot of people is to put in place, to thin the skin, as fucking dumb as that sounds, is like, oh yeah, well, estradiol is the reason that we're not seeing the lines. It's the reason that we're not as conditioned, we're not as tight, you're not as dry. And it's like, you're smashing down something that already is fucking low. Like, I don't understand. I mean, like at the time, I'm like, yeah, this is must be what everyone does. This is what I'm hearing everyone does. I mean, that one at the end of the day, I don't think it has a place unless you are someone who their estrogen is very high. If you were experiencing estrogen dominance, perhaps it makes sense, but that isn't something even a contest prep that we're typically going to see. It doesn't mean there are individuals who aren't going to fall into that category, but I'd also want to ask, okay, like why aren't we managing this in the off season? Why don't we have something in place to modulate estrogen to begin with? That would be a big one. I specifically think, and it really comes from the, I would say the anecdote of like hearing women hearing women claim that it allowed for them to get leaner, or hearing women claim that like I guess the purpose of it was to allow the muscle to show through to mitigate the thicker skin. And it's like, like you could just have more muscle or you could just get leaner. Like I got really lean for both my 2021 season, my 22 season, and it's like my 22 season, actually, this is important to mention. 22 self-coached, with John in my corner. I didn't use an Olvadex, so I was able to get much leaner. I've used it, I've not used it. I don't think it was a game changer. And I think a lot of people fall into that trap of having top coaches tell them, like, this is a requirement, this is necessary, this is something that all the girls are taking, this is what you have to do. And it's like, I feel like it's a cop out. I feel like it's just something to give them hope and to tell them, like, oh yeah, we need this in place. When in actuality, maybe we need to start off a little bit leaner. Maybe we need to have more muscle in these areas that you aren't as developed in.
So what is the reasoning behind it to create thinner skin?
Yes. Sorry, I'm grabbing my charger. Yeah, yeah, to thin out the skin because, epidermis varies vastly. We're talking, got to be talking about like several millimeters at this point, right?
How exactly would that thin your skin?
I don't know.
Oh,
I
so
don't
it
know.
doesn't
Might
it
be
doesn't
something
make
you could.
sense. I thought you were about to fucking explain this. I was like, that doesn't make any sense.
No, 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 no. I don't have an explanation for that. The other one would be, yeah, I mean, like we had Anavar in place for quite a bit of time, and it just, again, it's like, it didn't make a lot of sense. It's like, probably should have had it in place, not in prep. Even though it's a low dose, it's still like, it should be put in at a time where the athlete can actually take advantage of it. Otherwise, yeah, we're leveraging it for its anabolic property, but if we can't fully harness that, well, it's kind of a wash, but you're still getting that same exposure. And I just think like when we're talking about a harm reduction, we're talking about approaching this in a way that really is about preserving femininity based on what the athlete deems that is. I think for most women, at least the women that come to me, it really does come down to only using something if it's indicated or using it in a way that puts them at the least exposure. So, generally, if you don't have the ability to really harness and take advantage of growth, why do we have the anabolic in place? And if we're talking about like, doing kind of well at a regional show, like get the fuck out of here. Like you should
Hmm.
be able to do that without the anabolic in place.
Yeah. So I know you said you're typically lean towards primo if it's real, right? Is the reason behind that because with Masteron it tends to be, have more anti-estrogen properties, so you'd be driving estrogen lower as a female?
Not not necessarily. Primo or Masteron, I mean they're on the table. It really comes down to accuracy. If you feel like you can source quality Primo, great. I mean, from an anabolism standpoint, they're going to build relatively the same. Some people do find that they're partial to one over the other. There, again, anecdotally, there's individuals who have said that Mastron, they felt like it did result in a higher rate of androgenic properties. If that's something that someone comes to me, like comes to the table with, and they're like, "Hey, it's not something I want to use," or flip flopped, "Hey, I don't want to use Primo." I'm open to exploring their preference, but ultimately, I think either could be considered. In terms of actually driving estrogen down, I don't think that's a good use for Mastron. I mean, like when we look at the profile, I don't think it's something that I I would put a lot of I would invest a lot of weight into.
Yeah.
But if estrogen is a problem, I would rather look to something like over the counter, like dim calcium glucarate to modulate that. Just because, I mean, the ability to do that is, I imagine it would be highly variable.
To manage estrogen.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. That's something we should clarify here, I think, because I have a lot of guys come to me and they think that Masteron is an AI. They think it's literally an AI. Like I've had guys, I don't want to use Masteron because it's going to crash my testosterone. It's like, all right, like I don't know what you think is going to happen here, but it's not going to be anything to that significant extent. People do use it with the intent of trying to use it as an AI, and they'll still have, tests, at least for men, at 1,000 milligrams, right? Oh, you throw a master on, it's AI, and it's not going to do much. But I was asking, maybe you lean towards primo because of the slight effects it might have in driving estradiol lower, which could potentially be bad for a female.
And actually going back to the Masteron, I I feel like I feel like its ability to lower estradiol. I mean, is that something that you tend to see? Like, do you see that result in your clients?
I've never seen it. It's just anecdotally people say shit. It's all in their head.
Okay, I'll bring that up then. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's Victor Black who's like come out and shit on that recently, and he goes, I mean, if you want to go like elbow
This
deep
guy,
into,
this guy, fucking.
hey,
Oh
we
my
got to
god.
clarify,
There's gonna be
otherwise.
a post about this soon now. There's gonna be a post on his wall.
No, no, no. This is good because I'm really wanting to clarify because I there's someone who put out yeah, Mastron's ability to lower estrogen. If I'm fucking it up, I'll own it, but like I'm pretty sure he was like, that's just not supported.
Yeah, I don't know. I really I've never fucking experienced it myself with either any of the compounds. And I've never seen it actually play out with any clients. It's just constantly like a concern that people have, or they'll try to think it makes sense to implement it to drive estrogen lower. And it really never made much sense to me. But
I
did you
think,
look at,
yeah,
he just came out and made a post about that?
this wasn't recent. I mean, like I'm pulling from way back when. And I mean, maybe I'm misremembering that, but I I just that's something I'm not entirely sure, and I do try to be careful with that, just because I mean, the times where I've said mix something up or given made a statement that like, oh, this does this, like I don't know. I try to keep my hands clean because there's so many people that will just say things as anecdote as if they're evidence based. And with the master, I'm not entirely sure. That's why I was curious if it's something that you were like you feel good about.
Mm-mm. I mean, I'm comfortable with the fact that it doesn't, aromatize to the same extent that a test or derivative or fucking trend might. But yeah, I've never seen it actually lower estrogen. Like if a guy's running 750 tests, like we're still going to use an AI if we need to at that point. We're not just throwing in master on to fucking bring estrogen down.
Yeah, yeah. I on that. How do you feel about guys just having AIs in place year round, like just alongside their TRT protocol?
I don't think it's needed in TRT. I don't think anybody needs to use an AI in TRT. If that's the case, you are dosing too high or you just need more frequent injections. Some people do better with, every other day, every day, even with just microdosing their TRT, taking, whatever, 150, 200 milligrams a week. When people have those big spikes, which you'll see clinics prescribe too, where they'll prescribe, I've seen clinics prescribe fucking, an injection literally once every 14 days, which is insane. It's
Just
nuts. These are
bolus, yeah.
doctors saying this, and they're just getting this huge spike and this huge drop off. Then estrogen rises, they get all these problems. So then they use AIs. They think they need AIs in place. I think there's definitely merit for using it in an off season, depending on that person's cycle. Because I know that you were with J3U. I've had John on here. That's it. I think it's actually how I found you originally, was when you were with J3U initially. And I know we talked about that briefly when he came on the podcast. Is the whole concept of all anabolics produce the same growth, and there's really, you just can be partial to one, which I think I agree to some extent, but anecdotally, again, I've had the experiences that I talked about this. Like, if we took 1,500 milligrams total and we had 1,000 of that come from test versus 750 tests and 750 mast, versus, higher test, higher mast, do you think the results would be the same? And he even agreed with me there. He's like, there is seem to be something about having slightly higher tests that just produce more results. And I don't think there's any research back to
Mm.
it, but I do see, if the individual if that's the route they want to take and they are willing to take AIs, that we could run higher tests and, make that sacrifice to use the AIs along that in off season, if that's the route they want to go.
Interesting. Yeah. No, no, I mean, it's really, I don't think that we can completely eliminate anecdote here. So, I mean, that's something it's good that people are having conversations and, yeah, gosh, I kind of resent when the evidence-based crowd puts out information not like that. I mean, that makes complete sense, but tries to pass it off as supported, like scientifically backed, which I do think like we probably both see like in reels and the short form content where it's just like, oh, this is one and the same. Like they're kind of leveraging like the trust that the audience member has in them to then pass off something that they may have seen or they may have done without realizing like, oh, like that, yeah, by all means, like if you're willing to try it, but also keep in mind like it's still, we still need more evidence. But that's cool. I'm glad you had John on. I'm glad y'all are able to dive into that.
Yeah, yeah, no. It's a I think people also like it is bad. People would pass off anecdotes as evidence, but also, it's iffy because you have this huge group of people in competitive bodybuilding, and you could kind of look at them as like all kind of test subjects, even though nobody's taking like the data, but it's like we all have
Yeah.
anecdotes and everybody's doing like kind of the same shit. And a lot of people will support the same things, and sometimes it's completely, inaccurate and like makes no fucking sense. But I try to take everything with a grain of salt and like take things from this person and that person and like really like think about it and obviously put it into practice. I put things into practice over time. And I just have really, in my opinion, like you said, like all anabolics are the same. Like on paper, the information we put out there, I think is very important. So I like to go by that and clarify this is what we have on paper, and this is what it shows. But in practical application, does it always play out this way? It's like, no, not really. And it could be for various reasons. It could be, maybe you just are more partial to one. Maybe an individual just has a really bad response to one. Maybe the way somebody metabolizes something is differently from another person. I don't think we have a ton of research on this stuff to even, come to those conclusions. This is where antidote comes into place. But a lot of the bodybuilders that you see, man, it's like a lot of them, for the most part, don't run low test to make up the rest of the milligrams with DHT derivatives. Like that's just, I've never really seen that happen until recently. And then even if you've been like keeping up with John recently, like he used to do that. He had lower tests and now he's going to open and his test is higher. His test is
Yeah.
higher. It's just,
Yeah.
there does seem to be something to it. And maybe we just don't have the exact evidence for it. Maybe somebody really gets a great response off of Primo or MPP, just that the way they metabolize that, they get an even better response from that than tests. And I don't think that's like something that I want to say for sure, but I think it's just, if you're
Yeah.
taking gear, I tell everybody you're a lab rat. Like you're going to have to experiment, and there's like rules to abide by, and there's, guidelines we have, and we understand these things to this extent, but ultimately that's not really how it always just plays out in practical application. It's not that black and white.
Totally, totally. And on the male side, I think you have much more room to experiment, to push
Definitely.
the limits. With females, I'm like, I just don't think that a lot of them realize the risk that they're taking.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause once your voice gets deeper, I don't think you could reverse that. No,
No, I mean, like
no.
you want to go to the speech therapy, sure. I think I guess you can consider surgery, but like I mean, I think really you would have to look at like vocal training, and that's something that like, frankly, I don't think a lot of people are going to do. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, some of the side effects irreversible, and unless you're just gonna like catch them when you first encounter them, I mean, like, what's the play at that point? Okay, it's stop using drugs, which
Hmm.
a lot of people, I think they get caught up in the accolades of like, oh, I'm a bodybuilder, identify as a bodybuilder, identify as, a pro bikini competitor. And it's like, I want to keep pushing that threshold. I'm so close. And then you get to a point where even with something like vocal training, you're still looking at like not good outcomes.
Volkswagen, is that like singing classes?
Yeah, I guess you would work with like a speech pathologist.
Which is just a whole class of just open bodybuilding women on trend, just in a singing class.
Oh my God. I feel like it would be one on one, but I can actually imagine like group discount.
Yeah, that'd be fucking hilarious. All right,
Oh my God.
before we wrap this up here, because we've been on here for quite a bit. What are your plans for future here? I know you said you want to continue competing. You want to be an Olympian. What do you see yourself doing in regards to coaching? I know you're gonna pioneer the women's side of PED education. What are your plans here? You got anything going on?
Uh, yeah, so I just finished nursing school like 2 weeks
Wow,
ago. Yeah,
awesome!
yeah.
Congratulations.
So thank you. I'm going to take my licensure exam. Right now, the focus is on gearing up for some really exciting things coming out later this year on the business end. I do want to put out more educational content from a coaching standpoint. Yes, I take clients. So, I mean, like anyone who's looking for one on one coaching, you can find all of my links and info in the show notes. But if you want more information, definitely look Instagram, Cory_fit, website, Cory Fit, self selecting podcast, all the platforms, Patreon, YouTube, Spotify, for my own competition plans. I'm close to where I want to be the next time I compete, and I'm not sitting too far away. So we'll see. First up, I'm gonna get that exam, the NCLEX, done here in the next month or so. I had a lot of travel this month, so I wasn't trying to rush that. But maybe something later this year, just depending on how things are looking. The next time I get on stage, I don't want to have to compensate so much with posing in order to stack up. But I mean, seeing where I'm at now, I don't think I'm far, maybe a few more pounds. So we'll see.
Again, there. That's awesome. And tell me about your Patreon, no? Because your Patreon is what, like a paid, more in-depth information type of thing.
Yeah. So I've got two tiers in there. So $5 tier, $10 tier. Basically, for a $10 tier, what we're looking at is like you can ask questions and you can listen to me talk some more about all this stuff. So if you aren't happy with, if you want more, if you
Yeah.
want even more content, basically people will submit their questions and do like open Q&As. But listeners know I get really long-winded with a lot of these answers, but just going over like more like case study, like practical application for some of these PED related topics, and also not PED related topics. I will do the occasional like additional podcast there too. But yeah, no, Patreon, it's a good way to continue learning. Pretty low buy-in.
Okay. Is that where all your clips that you post on Reels are from? Is that from your Patreon?
No, no. All the clips I record, I did it the inverse way. I didn't take from long form. I just did it the short form. And I'm like, and now we'll do the long form. So now that's what I'm doing, is doing like
So those are
self-selecting
all
podcasts.
premeditated clips.
Yeah.
Oh
Yeah.
wow. I thought they were candid.
So some of them, right? Yeah. Um, some of them, like, okay, so I've been doing the podcast for 3 months now. And so like, even like we talked about before I got on. So I've got an hour 40 of reels from this podcast, like that I can just
Yeah.
clip now. So I mean, great. Two birds, one stone. So things like that, longer form episodes I'll clip from. But then some I'm like, okay, I've got these Q&As. I haven't talked about this in a while. Let me just like condense this down into short form content. People tend to like that.
Okay. That's cool. All right, guys. Cory Hageman. Check her out. If you want to listen to her more, go check out her Patreon. If this hour, 2 hours wasn't enough. And thanks for coming on.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yep. And I'll see you guys next time on the next episode of Brass Tag Bodybuilding.